Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Catechism Guy Podcast. My name is Taylor, and this is the show where we open up this big, heavy book called the Catechism and learn what the Catholic Church actually teaches. All right, in this episode today, I have joining me in opening up the Catechism, Adrienne Garalde, a Catholic parish youth minister from Orlando, Florida. He actually even has his own podcast called Living Ardently. And so during our conversation, I asked him, what does it exactly mean to live ardently? And then we together open up the Catechism and see what the church talks about both our passions or emotions. And we look at also, what does it mean to live a virtuous life? So if you are either starting to try to live a life of virtue or you want to continue growing in virtue, this is a great episode to listen to because we talk about some practical ways in which you could do this. And we also, like I said, when we open up the Catechism, we see what the church says about that emotional faculty that we as human beings have. And I really like what we end up saying and kind of just discussing about how we can use our emotions and use our natural passions and order them by the use of our reason to grow in virtue. So this is a great episode and I can't wait for you to listen. But other than that, some quick kind of news, quick announcement. Some of you can actually see me right now, which is pretty cool. And so if you're listening to this on a podcast app and you only hear the audio, I want to make a quick announcement that we are officially now a video podcast. We are now on YouTube, and you can not just listen to this podcast, but you can even watch this podcast. So if you're listening on the podcast app, you can find a link in the show notes to our YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, please go ahead and below hit subscribe, that big red subscribe button, so that you can be notified when each and every new episode of the podcast is released. Also, honestly, the reason why I'm getting this onto video now on YouTube is because I'm trying to expand the reach of the podcast. I really want to continue to grow this show. And the only way to do that is by continuing to put it on new platforms and to reach new audiences. So by you hitting subscribe in YouTube, that'll actually also help get this podcast and this show to more and more people and to new people. So please do that in helping us out. And something I plan on doing on the YouTube channel that maybe you can look forward to is if you have found that these guest episodes have been a little long and difficult for you to digest, my plan is to take each of these full episodes and to cut them down into little snippets that are more topical and create separate videos, video snippets of those kind of parts of the podcast so that you can digest just parts of it in smaller doses. So, and I think that'll even make this podcast hopefully more shareable on social media. That'll make it hopefully continue to grow and get the show out there to more and more people. So anyways, with that being said, I don't want to keep you from hearing my conversation with Adrienne. So as always, let's get to it. So, of course, first and foremost, Adrienne, dude, thank you so much for saying yes to being on the show and being on this podcast.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. It was my pleasure. Thank you for asking me. Like I said, it's like my first time being as a guest, not an interviewee, not an interviewer.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
So for our listeners, of course, I know that you have a podcast yourself, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast? Also, just tell us a little bit about yourself, who Adrienne Garalde is.
So I'm Adrienne Garalde. I'm a youth minister over in Orlando, Florida. The Diocese of Orlando in Florida. I've been a youth minister for almost 3 years now. Graduated from Ave Maria University back in 2017, and kind of came back into the church a few years before that, and really fell in love with Christ during my senior year. The summer before my senior year in high school, and I went from there and back, but I love journeying like that, seeing where I've come and where I've came from. And so my podcast, I'm a host. I host a podcast that I started just over a year ago. It's called Living Ardently. I started it just because I was bored, and it became something from out of boredom into something that's like a ministry that has a blog, where we post daily on Instagram, and eventually be a full-on blog site. Again, it started off as a blog site, and then transformed into a podcast because I just figured that I wasn't a good writer and didn't want to make time to write.
Yeah.
So I just started speaking like I normally do to people on a microphone. So
right, the youth minister life.
And so, yeah, the youth minister life. And
yeah,
on Living Ardently, we talk about what it means to be. We talk about people's stories of being people who are passionate, who are living, in fact, ardently, which is passionate, virtuous, zealous, and whatever that may be. We kind of take time to talk to people, and also we do like these monthly Q&As where we try to share, my co-host and I, Jarrell, from The Living Person, share some of our thoughts and experiences and what it means to, whatever questions people have about the faith. So it's a journey. We've been constantly changing how we do things, but that's, I think, the podcast life,
Yeah, absolutely. And so maybe before we even like start talking about what it means to live ardently and dive into your story, I guess I should just share with our listeners that our topic for this podcast is what it means to live ardently, but also we're going to talk about the virtuous life, what virtue is and why it's so important to live a life of virtue, especially as men in this world today. So, of course, you just told us a little bit about your podcast and the fact that it's called Living Ardently, but maybe we can start with your personal stories. And I'm curious, were you raised Catholic? Were your parents strong in their faith? Maybe we can start there and just like, how did you come to know and love and even serve the Lord with your life?
Jesus. Yeah. So my basic testimony is nothing more different than most, kids who were raised Catholic. I was born and raised Catholic. But like many people weren't very Catholic growing up, just kind of did it because my parents told me to. My parents themselves were pretty lukewarm, but it was part of their culture. I'm also Filipino, so like it's just a cultural thing at some point. And in high school, like I said, the summer before my senior year in high school, I went to this Catholic retreat that I got, convinced that it was maybe something I could have fun at. And then I fell in love with Christ there at adoration. And I was like, I just remember being in adoration and looking around all these people like in awe of this thing in the monstrance, like in this golden plaque, like what's going on? Why is everyone so emotional? And so I was like, okay, if people are saying that this is God, it's like, okay, either that's God or all of these people are crazy. And what's easier to believe is that thing is God, Yeah. And so had my conversion there, really decided to live a life of for Christ, but I really didn't know what that meant yet. So I started that journey from square one. My best friend and my girlfriend at the time also decided like this was something they wanted to do for themselves in their lives, and went to RCIA to get confirmed. And so it was like us three journeying together towards Christ, and it was really cool. And then I decided I was helping out with my youth group, becoming very involved after that. And I had this this call to do youth ministry, but I was like, no, I want to be a graphic designer. I want to, I want to go work for Pixar, for Disney, be an animator, work on films. But Christ was just constantly always pulling me. I did a year in community college, of just studying, the graphic design, and just didn't feel like I got straight A's, made dean's lists. I just but this wasn't fulfilling me. So I was like, okay, well, what's next? I went to go visit Ave Maria University that fall semester, in my first year, and fell in love. And I was like, I don't have the money for a private Catholic university, but I'm gonna try it. And my pastor, who was my spiritual director, told me if you really have this call and you if you have that desire, the strong desire in your heart to teach teens and to be a volunteer, the best way you can do that is to fill your cup, And he said, you can't give what you don't have. He said in Latin, nemo dat quod non habet. And I was like, what's that mean? I was like, you can't give what you don't have. If you don't know your theology, how are you going to teach teens about Christ,
Absolutely.
And I was like, that's true. So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to apply. And I applied and I got in, and I was able to pay for 3 semesters, and I ran out of money. And I was doing spiritual direction, catching up with my pastor. And he's like, all right, so how much does the bill cost? I was like, no, Father, I was just here to,
Wow.
talk to you and do spiritual direction. It's like, I know,
Wow.
but financial reasons are not going to be the reasons why you don't follow your call.
Dang.
And that was like the first time I was like, wow, all right. Someone told me that I had a call,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like they meant it,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
He said it with such conviction. So I was like, okay, well, Lord, if this is true, then I'll humbly accept the money.
That's amazing.
Sent him the bill, and I was able to pay for that semester. He paid for my summer semester. Then he left. He was relocated to a different parish, and I was able to save up money to pay for the rest of my time at Ave and graduate with degree in theology.
Mm-hmm.
There was even a time just before my last few semesters where the bill was like triple the amount after he had helped me. And I was like, what the heck? I saved up for this amount, not for that amount.
Mm-hmm.
It was like 3,000 more than I had saved up. And I was like, all right, well, I guess this is it. And I'm not going to ask for more money, Lord, whatever. And I just left it up to him. And I was helping at a retreat on campus. And during that summer, so I was traveling back. And just before I traveled back, I got a letter saying that the bill that they had originally sent went from $4,000 to what I had originally planned for.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for some reason, I don't know, they didn't explain it really well. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going back. And it was just a whole ride. And I just really learned to trust God and financial needs.
Yeah.
And just went with it. And so there was like that deeper. So that was my initial conversion was at Steubenville. My deeper conversion and conviction in Lord was there.
So quick
during that financial struggle.
Quick question, Adrienne. So the retreat that you went on the summer before your senior year in high school, was that Steubenville?
Yeah, Steubenville, Florida,
Oh, gotcha.
and it wasn't even Orlando yet. It was in Palm Beach.
You know what's crazy is, so I don't know what year high school you graduated, but the summer before my senior year, I attribute my first like major conversion to Steubenville as well. But I didn't live in Florida. I live in California. But so I went to Steubenville, San Diego. But no joke, like that's usually awesome. When people ask me, I say the same thing. So that's funny. That's cool.
Yeah, it's the initial, right? And it's awesome because I feel like I feel like it's not such a like I said in the beginning, it's not very different from many like kids who like had the conversion because a lot of the times you hear they happen to retreat and then it goes deeper, you know?
Yeah.
But I always bring my teens to Steubenville because, you know, when's that year going to be for them?
Yeah, it's that initial encounter like with like Christ and like the sacraments. So you feel like, okay, he's real, he's tangible and he's real. And then it's like, okay, now I can walk with you as a youth minister or whoever and help you to like see that God's always present, right? Even if you don't have that emotional, crazy experience. But I think sometimes it's important to encounter God in a real way like that first, right? So
and to see that the church is not just a bunch of like people, like elderly people in the church, you know,
even though those people are good too. Yeah,
those are good too. But like, you know, when a teen goes into a church and sees that, they don't see people like themselves.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
They're not going to be attracted to go there, you know.
For sure.
Kids want to go to school because they're people their age, you know?
Yeah. It seems like, oh, this is for old people, especially today, right? Where we think that like, oh, the Catholic Church is behind the times. And then you walk into a church and you see an old person or old people and you're like, yeah, I was right. But see, when you see young people, and I think I had the same experience, when you go to Steubenville, everyone's young and everyone's super excited, like overly excited. Like what drugs did they give these people? And, you know what I mean? And I remember like taking teens to Steubenville. My favorite part was the Friday night walking into the big whatever gym or room. And seeing the look.
What's going on?
The look on your teens' faces. And they're just like, what did I say yes to? It's like, don't worry, give it a day or two. You'll be doing the exact same thing. So yeah,
it's so true. So, my favorite part, that's my favorite part, and then the second favorite part is the drive back home, because that's where like that's immediately the conversion part, like where like you have to follow up. One of my teens, the first time I went on retreat with them on at Steubenville, one of them came up to me and was like, "Hey, Adrienne, how do I tell my friends that I don't want to smoke weed with them anymore?" I'm like, dude, wow, like you got that from this weekend? Like, yeah.
That's awesome.
That's going to be hard. And so we had this conversation and it's huge. You know, that's like the favorite, that drive home for us is only 45 minutes, but still.
Sure. You know, I think what you just said too, like hits home. I was in prep for our conversation. I was kind of reading a little bit of the Catechism paragraphs that we kind of talked about. And something that hit me was that idea of the conversion, that moment of conversion. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like there's one thing of actually encountering God's presence and maybe like coming to that realization that he's real. Like you kind of said, when you looked around and saw like all these crazy people crying or whatever, and you're like, okay, it's more likely that God is real. But then it's another thing, as you said, like coming, that student coming home from Steubenville, having a moment of conversion, right? I think there's like a distinction there, right? That just because you had this spiritual experience doesn't actually mean that you're dropping your nets and following Jesus, right?
Right.
And that's a huge thing. And that's why, like, so I personally, I did youth ministry for almost 4 years, and I trust me, I loved it. It's challenging, but you get to see a lot of different experiences and see people grow, young people grow. Now I'm in the school, and it's a totally different experience. I'm teaching high schoolers the faith rather than just like trying to, you know, lead them to encounter God. It's like, it's just a different space, a different kind of part of what I would call the process of evangelization. And so I've come to be very passionate about catechesis, which is why I kind of started this whole Catechism Guy thing. And like, because I think that we need to draw people into the encounter of Jesus Christ, of course, but which we lack in a lot of places lack that. A lot of ministries lack in doing that. A lot of parishes, right? But then we also, on the other end, fail the catechetical part, right? We fail the actual walking with and the conversion, and you know what I'm saying, and the being drawn into the life of Jesus, like, you know what I'm trying to say. So so anyways,
there's like, I think there's like the three parts. Like my director of religious education at our parish, we like have a really good like relationship, which is like mentorship kind of deal. And a lot of the thing he always calls is like encounter, grow, and serve, right? So like the first thing we want to do for people is to help them encounter Christ. So that's usually the retreats. And then like the next step after that is helping them grow. So teaching them the catechesis and helping them understand that relationship building and meeting Christ in the day-to-day life. Yeah. And then serve is trying to help people do the same, get people to encounter, right? And so like that cycle. And so I think that's like the 3-step ladder or the 3-step circle that happens over and over again in our lives. And so
for sure,
it's really cool. Yeah, totally. I love it. I love that initial conversion part because the actual conversion, because it happens a lot. And I know we have a lot to talk about, but just as you were talking about earlier, I just, remembered like at my Steubenville, when I went, we didn't stay at a hotel because we were like 10 minutes away from the retreat center. So we just drove home. We drove home, and like, it was weird because like you weren't in like, you were back at your home. Yeah, it kind of ruins it. The goal was to like be away from your phones or give your phones to your parents. Yeah. But I remember the first night I already had this like kind of like one of the talks by Chris Stefanik and like your parents and like loving them and like understanding where they come from and seeing your parents as people who are also hurt the way you were hurt, and what you might have done to hurt them more, And, at the time, my parents and I didn't have the strongest relationship. So I remember going home and just tearing, like in tears, and apologizing to them and like saying like, that was like my first half of that like conversion moment. And then going back on the second day. And that's where like the like Eucharistic part of that conversion happened. And I was just like, okay, either everyone's crazy or God's real, and so. That's beautiful. But yeah, so that's in a nutshell is my testimony.
Like initial conversion,
and, after initial conversion, but then, like I said, I grew closer and deeper in love with the call of youth ministry, and followed it and went to a great university where I met some amazing friends who helped me journey towards Christ, intellectually, but also relationally, head and heart, and became a youth minister shortly after that, and that's been the journey, a whole different journey, but an amazing one too. So
so as we were saying before, your podcast is Living Ardently, and correct me if I'm wrong, that name came from your household at Ave Maria University. Right. So tell us
at Ave Maria.
Yeah, can you?
Yeah, so
go ahead. Yeah, share like what is that? Where does that name come from? What does it mean? Like, what meaning and value did it have for you while at Ave and like even today?
Right. I'll be honest with you. Yeah. The main reason why originally like wanted to look at Ardent's. It's the household was called Ardent's Virtues.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't know what a household is, per se, the households are like kind of like Catholic frats, but not like really a frat.
Without the partying and stuff, or what?
Without the partying, instead of
kind of like
partying,
with
praying.
less partying.
Yeah, with less partying. So instead of like the organizational part of it, it's more like a club of sorts, and we get to pray together and enjoy some fellowship and brotherhood with people, and we follow these certain pillars, and so very similar in some aspects of fraternities, but not at the same time. So Ardent's Virtue stand for like fiery virtue, passionate virtue, and that wasn't what originally attracted me to it. It was actually the color of the household, which was maroon. Nice. And that was like my favorite color. And so I was like, gotcha. Yo, that's really dope. I'm going to head over there and check it out. And then I was like, wow, this is actually like, they had like amazing mission statement. And I was like, wow, like, okay, yeah, I was so convicted by what they said because they seemed so convicted about their mission as a household, and they were young. They had just started. And I was one of the first 3 initiates into the household. There was like the founding fathers of the household and then us. And they really like, they really pushed intentionality and vulnerability with people. Like that taught me a lot in how to do ministry, right? And how to be a good friend. And actually one of your last guest, Garrett Gamboa, who that's how we met, is because of his wedding. We were both his groomsmen.
You and I,
and a few other people, right? And he was one of my household brothers. He came in the semester after me, and we really bonded there. We became leaders of the household at some point with one of our other friends. And it was just like a strong bond through that household that taught me how like to live a passionate life for Christ, and live like an intentional disciple, right? Meaning like I'm thinking about doing this every single day, not just like when it's convenient for me, when I think about it, but like even I have to choose to be a disciple every day. Right. And having the passion for it and like finding joy in it, even in the times where it's hard to find the good, right? It's hard to love people, hard to love your brothers. We're doing it anyway, because that's who we are as disciples, right? And so that household taught me a lot, as much as it was difficult at points to, do meetings when you had schoolwork and things like that. It taught me some discipline and time, and, how to like, hey, like what's, I think Garrick had said it when he was with you, like one of the challenges he gave you all was like asking people how they are, but then like not taking good for an answer, be like, no, how really are you? And going deeper. And that's how I really, really got to know Garrick, because he did that to me. And I was like, whoa, what do you mean? I'm good. Like, yeah. And it made me think a little bit more. And so that was like kind of the basis. We ended up Googling this thing where we did a night where part of our initiation is we went to go pray with 3 people. Like kind of like he did with his at Home Depot. I think he shared that they sent him on this mission, and it's like, okay, you're gonna go pray with 3 random people in Home Depot. We did that, but on campus, and that even was scary for me. Yeah. But that was because I hadn't done that before. And I mean, I'm in a Catholic campus. Like, it shouldn't be hard to pray with people randomly. But yeah, that household is where the Ardent's Virtues is where I learned a lot, and then wanted to keep a part of me in my life. And so I made the podcast titled after it, And so instead of me calling it Ardent's Virtues as well, I wanted to give it a more of like an active way of like a call to action, right? So like the name is a call to action to live ardently in and of itself. So living ardently is really just to live a passionate life, to live for a passion. Usually, I mean, obviously you want to live passionately for Christ, but like some people might have different passions in a way. Like I'm more passionate about defending life for Christ.
Sure.
And I like to pursue that. I mean, I like to let people pursue that, and I want people to share that story. When I first started the podcast, though, it wasn't always like that. You know, it wasn't. It was very young, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was just kind of sharing my thoughts on things. And it was great, but it wasn't really like, I don't know, it didn't really show what living ardently really meant.
Yeah.
And just kind of I didn't feel like talking about myself was really going to show how to live an ardent life, you know? So I wanted to pull in people as guests to show like, oh, this dude who's a dad is living a passionate life being a father, you know, or this artist is living a passionate life by being an artist, you know, fulfilling his call as an artist. And so I kind of learned that through the process and made it so that I was never doing a podcast by myself because I'm boring, you know.
I don't think you're that boring.
Yeah, I mean, like people heard enough of me. People want to come and hear other people's stories, and
for sure,
I want to hear that too. So,
I feel the same way, which is why, like, as I was telling you before, like that's why I want to have guests on too. It's like you get tired of hearing your own voice for one, and then two, it's like this is an opportunity not just for like the podcast and people who might listen to hear people's stories, but even like for me and for you, like when we have the chance to interview someone, it's a chance to like us to grow too and to talk to people that we otherwise would never talk to and stories we would otherwise never hear. So
it's true.
So I think what would be interesting and maybe kind of fun is if we opened the catechism and looked at what the church teaches about these two things. One being passion, and which I'll be totally honest with you when we look at this here in a second. The church, when it speaks of passion, speaks of it in a little bit different of a way than I think you and I normally would, like you were saying about being passionate or intentional, right? So we can maybe make the distinction and talk about why maybe the church says it like that versus how we in our normal conversation do. And then also we'll look at what the church says about virtue. What is virtue? You know, what's the point of virtue? Why do we need it? And why does it lead to a more full and free life? So So anyways, I think it'd be good to start with our passions and what passions are. Right. So this starts in paragraph 1762, and the church speaks about primarily the morality of our passions all the way up until about paragraph 1770, and this is in the section on morality, I believe. So anyways, the church says this in 1763. We'll start with this, what the church says about the word passion in general. It says that the term passions belongs to the Christian patrimony. Feelings or passions are emotions or movements of the sensitive appetite that incline us to act or not to act in regard to something felt or imagined to be good or evil. So I think it's kind of what you've said in different words, right? Like it's that feeling within ourselves, that fiery feeling, like you see. And I think what I like here is it kind of points out that this can be towards something good or evil, right? Good or evil, yeah. And you get that fiery feeling within you, I think, towards both. Right. You experience like a sense you see evil occurring, and you just have that, you know, maybe it's that Christian fiery within you, whatever, and you're just like, I want to do something about this, you know?
Right. It's something like, you know, when, you know, with everything that's going on right now, all the division that's happening with all the, with the social justice stuff and the racial injustice, or like even the mask and the coronavirus stuff, like people are passionate about things, whether it's for good or for evil, and that makes like a very divisive playing field, right? So people like have to, a polarized playing field. And now there's a bunch of passionate people butting heads, you know? So like good and evil, like, I mean, I'm not going to say which one is good or which one's evil per se, because, you know, that's again, like your passions are the passions that you try to, you know, what feeds your appetite. But yeah, there's just a lot of that right now. You can see in our world that, you know, it plays a part in everything we do, I think.
Yeah. And I think you saying that, there was a line, in paragraph 1767, it says what you kind of just said. It says, in themselves, passions are neither good nor evil. So I think something that the church clarifies here is maybe in saying, kind of jumped ahead to 1767. In 1765, I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place. It says that there are many passions, right? There are many passions, but the most fundamental passion is love. Anyways, what I wanted to get at here is passions are not good or evil, right? Passions are that that feeling within ourselves, right? That emotional part of us as human beings, human beings, we encounter, as we just read, something good or something evil. And we want to do something about it. And so it's not the passion that's itself intrinsically morally good or morally evil, but I think it's what we use them to lead us towards, right?
Right.
So it can...
Yeah, I think a good way to kind of look at it is maybe like a gas, like the passion is gasoline for your car.
I like that.
And then the thing, it's like the thing that keeps your car going, but it's you who like decides where that car is going to go using that gas, using that fuel.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah. It's like it's a tool, right? Our passions are those feelings, emotions are a tool, and you can order them towards the good, or you can order them towards the evil.
Right.
And so I think this is why virtue, right, is so important. But before we get to virtue, so in paragraph 1768, it says this kind of a continuation of what we are just now saying. It says that strong feelings are not decisive for the morality or the holiness of persons. They are simply the inexhaustible reservoir of images and affections in which the moral life is expressed. Passions are morally good when they contribute to a good action, and evil in the opposite case. The upright will orders the movements of the senses it appropriates to the good and to beatitude. An evil will succumbs them to disordered passions and exasperates them. Emotions and feelings can be taken up into the virtues or perverted by the vices. That's a lot, but I feel like that was like my favorite paragraph, honestly, in this section.
That is huge. Yeah.
So I don't know what you think about that, but
I was looking at when I was reading this beforehand. A lot. What I love what they used here is the disordered passions, right? Like the fact that the passions are not nearly good or evil, but it can be perverted or misused in a way. And so I think that language, I think, is important to distinguish, like, again, separating the fact that passion in and of itself is not a good or bad, right? Because I think, like we said earlier, we can easily, confuse that.
Sure.
Right.
If anything, I would say I would probably risk saying, even if I'm theologically wrong, I would risk saying that they're good. And the reason why I think that is just like the whole idea that, like, if to have passions, to have emotions is part of the human experience. And I think the fact that God becomes incarnate and he himself experiences emotions, right? And experiences passion and his passions, like, to give an example, right? He has emotion and he's passionate when he's carrying the cross and he's feeling the suffering, right? And allowing himself to express the sorrow that he has, right? When he locks eyes with the woman of Jerusalem and he feels a pity for them. Or for another example, kind of on the opposite end, where he enters the temple with, rope and he starts expressing a righteous anger. And that all comes from those passions, right? But obviously he's expressing those perfectly ordered towards the good in two different ways in those situations. But I think, if anything, that's what I would say. I'd go far enough and say that in the same way,
it's like,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just hearing you out.
Yeah. I
do this thing where when I hear people, I just kind of like say what they were gonna say too. I just have a bad habit of mine.
We're finishing each other's sentences. What's happening? But what I was gonna say though is I almost think of, like, us as human beings. Oftentimes when I teach my students at my school, and I'm talking about, like, what separates us human beings from other creatures, and there's a lot of different things you can talk about, right? You could take an entire philosophy course on this, but, like, what I usually focus on is that, like, us human beings, we have two particular faculties that other creatures don't have, and that's our intellects and our wills, right? Right. And like, for instance, animals, like animals, maybe like a pet or something, they don't have intellects and wills, right? Meaning they can't know things internally in their minds, like come to know truths. And then they also can't willfully choose good or reject good. Okay. They merely operate on instinct and on their passions. This is what I was going to get at, is we're similar to the animals in that we both have passions, right? We have something inside us. Like earlier today, today's Friday that we're recording this podcast, and you know, I've had some sort of inspiration in me say, you know, Taylor, you should do some sort of spiritual sacrifice today. Maybe don't have soda or have whatever it is, some luxury item, just as a little small sacrifice for a Friday, right? But I'm not gonna lie, like within me, I was like, dude, I want a cookie. I want something sweet right now, like so bad, right. You know, and I don't think I had a cookie today, but maybe I did. But my point is I almost think those are like the passions. Those are the animal part of us reacting, the want to fulfill some sort of carnal, natural desire. But, and that desire is not necessarily morally evil or morally good per se, but I think it is leading us towards a good. But like you said just a minute ago, it can be perverted. And to continue the example of eating a cookie, right? Like it's morally good to eat food because that's going to fill us and help us to continue to grow and to continue to live, right? But that can be perverted by vice, right? Where we overeat or we overconsume to the point of, you know, just unhealthiness or eating the wrong things or whatever that may be. You know what I mean? So I think this maybe is a decent example, I hope, of seeing how vice and virtue are at play with the passions, but because we're not merely natural animals, but we're made in the image and likeness of God with intellects and wills, we need to use our intellect, or we need to use our free will guided by our intellect to allow our passions to lead us towards the good and not towards, you know, vice or, you know, continuing in our own vices. So, and I think we haven't even talked about what virtue is yet, and we'll share that in a second from the Catechism, but this is what I think it means to at least attempt to live the virtuous life, you know?
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
You look like you're thinking like, deeply right now.
Yeah, and I have that face when I'm listening, but like, for example, like if you are, let's say, I don't know, let's give an example of like a doctor, right? So you're a doctor and you're treating these people, and there's like a lot of things that like doctors and nurses have to go through. And it's a lot of like, I mean, maybe I'm going into a field that I'm not very familiar with. Okay. So like,
sure.
Okay. Just say, let's say, okay, let's go into ministry where I know, right? So like let me not go there because I watched one like medical show. Yeah. Now I know, like, oh yeah, okay. Let's talk about medical stuff. Okay. Anyway, for like ministry, right? So when we have a team that is, like who wants to become a leader, right? They have this desire, this passion to be it. They say there's like two separate teams. One has that passion, they will both have that passion, but one, has that understanding of like, where virtue has a like how to use their virtue to kind of guide those passions, and the other one just wants to not speaking from experience or speaking about my own teens, but like one has like this desire to just prove every heresy wrong, right? Okay, in a way that is not even any more pastoral or ministerial, you know, and they like just want to attack all the heretics and just prove all the people who are like all the kids, like wants to like go to the middle schoolers and be like, this is what's right, this is da. But the other one is like, you know, more of a compassionate way of going about things. Like, who am I going to choose to be the leader if I had one more spot in my leadership team? I'm going to choose the one that has that the passions that are geared with the right virtues, right? Yeah. Does that make sense? Because like I'm not going to. I mean, I love both of them, and I love the passion that they both have. But I want this one to understand why getting in people's faces is probably not the right idea. And yet for that to happen is you need to teach them the virtue of like love, right? The virtue of understand that, you know, love has to come first with those passions, because otherwise, you know, like they're going to be used incorrectly. They're going to be perverted. They're going to be disordered in a way. You know? And I think it makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. And I was going to say, I think that in that particular situation, what's important is recognizing what's the ultimate good that you're trying to reach. Because like, I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, there's especially when I had my initial conversion, I can empathize with that person that's like, oh, I want to just make sure everyone knows the truth. Right. But like the reality is and I've heard many others say this before, like as Christians, the goal of our conversations when we get into arguments, in like, argument in the good sense of like trying to discuss the truth, our goal of those arguments or conversations are not to win the argument, but to win the soul of the person we're having that argument with. You know what I mean? Right?
Yes.
So I think when you have the proper end in mind, you're then able to know what the virtue is, I guess, that you should be trying to live out. Whereas like if you're just thinking about, your own goal, your own whatever sort of, what I'm trying to say, like your own agenda is what you're thinking, then that's not going to lead to you living a virtue or growing in a certain virtue. And it's not also going to benefit another person, because that's a self-seeking task. And love is ultimately, selfless. It's self-emptying, not self-seeking. So, so anyways.
Right.
So why don't we just real quick share the definition of a virtue that the Catechism gives us? I think it's a pretty clear definition and can help kind of tie this in a bow for us. So this is in paragraph 1803, just a few pages back or forward. It says that a virtue is an habitual and firm disposition to do the good. It allows the person not only to perform good acts, but to give the best of himself. The virtuous person tends toward the good with all his sensory and spiritual powers. He pursues the good and chooses it in concrete actions. And then it gives us a quote from St. Gregory of Nyssa. The goal of a virtuous life is to become like God. Okay. So I want to read paragraph 1804, but maybe I'll do that in just a bit. So, so basically a virtue is a habit, right? It's a habit that we've developed that makes it easy to do good, right? So to use an example, we could use the example we just used. We'll just say love, right? Or we'll just go back to that example you gave, right? In an argument, in a conversation, we're trying to help someone to know the truth, maybe about Catholicism, about the gospel. And, if we want to grow in our ability to love people in these conversations that we have, we need to repeatedly, intentionally practice selflessness in those conversations, being more willing to listen and not be the first to speak, to be more, patient and not so forceful with saying what is on our mind, right? And I think that it's easy to do that one time. It's maybe even easy to do that in two different circumstances, but for it to be authentically a virtue that we have developed, it is something that we eventually do every single time. Right? Because it's become a habit, it's become a part of our character. And I think when people today, I heard this said somewhere that today in education and in public education, but probably even in, unfortunately, Catholic education, because there's not a whole lot of a difference these days, except for the religion class, which I teach, by the way, is that we teach values and not virtues. Okay. And maybe I have to sit and let that sink in for a second. But what that kind of means is we sit back and we let people think, what is it that you value? What do you think is important in life? And then we sort of, and the problem with this is values change from generation to generation. What's important to one generation is not necessarily important to the other. Right. And so because of that, values are not transcendent truths that, that everyone needs to seek out or whatever. Whereas a virtue is something that actually informs your character and develops your character. And it's something that exists outside yourself, right? Like you can't change the fact that choosing to be selfless is always a virtue. Whether or not you think it is, it will always be a virtue, even if you don't want to be a selfless person, right? It's clear that when you're selfish, it destroys people's lives. But when you're selfless, it builds people up, right? And so it's more important that we focus on virtue versus just values. And I don't even remember why I was kind of comparing the two, to be totally honest with you. But if anything, just virtue is something that's deep and it's within our character. It's something that develops our character, and it's not just something that we find to be important. Yeah. So
I think the important part there is the point I think you were trying to make is that it was habitual. right? Then
Okay.
it's what habitual means. It's like you're constantly trying to do that. And like I said earlier, like in my household, a part of our household was to constantly try to be like disciples, right, of Christ, in a way of like being intentional with every single person we met, no matter who they were, knowing them at least trying to get their name and calling each person by name, and being intentional about that. And so like, I think with virtue, like it's something that doesn't, like, I think it comes naturally, right? But I feel like to really become good at it, like it says here, it has to be something that you can constantly practice on a day to day, so that it will become just an extension of how you act,
Yeah, for sure. And as what you're saying, that same thing though, unfortunately, can happen with vice, right? Like
Truth.
like, and I think sometimes vice, unfortunately, can be more natural than virtue. It depends on the person, but in the same way that to develop virtue you need to practice it, we develop vice by practicing it, right? The more and more we repeat certain sins, the more and more it just becomes a part of who we are, which is so scary. And I'm not saying that we are our sin, but it does affect our character, It does, if anything, sort of destroy our character and deplete it. So
it ruins how we see ourselves, like, I mean, a lot of the times, like that simple phrase of, and it's like a cheesy Facebook post that you probably seen back in the day where it says, the devil says, look at your sins. And then the God says, look at my son. Right. And it's like, I mean, yeah, it's cheesy, but it's true. But like when you start to like know yourself for your vices and for your sins, it depletes not only like how we act, but like how we see ourselves and how worthy we truly are. Right. We mean, like, we are undeniably worthy of mercy and of grace. But if we convince ourselves that the vices have taken over our lives and we're a lost cause, and I'll be honest, I know a lot of people who think that I'm too, like it breaks my heart when people say like, oh, I'm going to walk into the church and burn.
I know.
Like,
yeah.
I'm like, dude, like, no, like you're going to walk into the church and God's going to be like ready to like grab you and hug you, and not mean that you don't have to be in a church for Christ to do that. But like, in any case, like, it breaks my heart because like that there shows that they have already equated themselves with their vices, and that's all they ever will be, because they've made it a habit, because they made it something that is them, their identity, right? And so I feel I my hope is that we can get, at least in my lifetime, that I can get people to realize their worth and value, by helping them figure out what virtue is and living those virtues out. And especially the virtue of love, because that's who we are, and the very base of it all is that love is so important. And if we can get that, everything else will come and domino effect, become easier, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to point out, but kind of what you're saying is, I think but the reason why I think virtue is so important, like, in letting people know about virtue and teaching them virtue, is because this is mentioned in the paragraph I was going to say in 1804, the next one. It's at the very bottom. It says that the virtuous man is he who freely practices the good. And it doesn't really say it super explicitly there, but there's another section that basically says this, is that virtue makes us free, right? And this is why the Christian life is actually so attractive. But unfortunately, it's not proclaimed properly or well enough for people to know the truth of the Christian life. I don't know if that makes sense, but what I'm trying to say is, like, if it was actually proclaimed properly, people would hear the gospel proclaimed and be be drawn to it, because they would hear that what the gospel is telling me is that it's going to truly set me free. It's going to give me a freer life. And it's not the freedom that the world promises, like you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, and have no consequences, right? That's a false freedom. That's the devil's freedom, right? But a true freedom is the freedom to be able to choose love, and to choose love easily. And I think the thing is, though, and I talked about this on my podcast with Xavier, LaGuerta, and we talked a lot about we're both fathers and about loving our kids. And I, you know, as being a father now for a few years, like I feel like it's taught me more and more about how selfish I am. It's taught me more and more about this vice of selfishness that I didn't even know I had, that my whole life was about me. And up until having children, my life was about me. But now that I have children, it's revealed that vice, but it's given me the choice. Do I remain in it and continue to choose me, or do I allow myself to seek virtue and to be free? And what I mean by this is free in the sense of being able to go outside of myself and love my children without any sort of restraint. And I feel like I'm not saying this very clearly, but what I'm trying to say is when I need to sacrifice my own time or my own desire for my child or for whoever, if I'm truly free, it shouldn't be hard for me to say yes. But most of us are kind of, what's the word? We're locked up by our sin. You know, we're being held bound and being held captive by our sin, and we're not free to love others because we're so self-focused. True. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And I think this is the beauty of virtue is if we are living the virtuous life, or at least trying to live the virtuous life, we're going to be moving closer and closer towards authentic freedom. You know, but if we don't even get up out of our beds and try to be men or women of virtue, we're going to be so selfish and self-focused that anytime we're presented with an opportunity to love someone, we're not going to. And this is why I think in our day and age, in our culture, families are broken. The majority of marriages don't last. And it's because people are being trained by our culture to be self-seeking and not selfish, right? Or selfless, I should say. Right, we're teaching people how to remain in their vice and to, if anything, feed their vice rather than set them free to become men and women of virtue. Right. You know,
right? I think there's like, I feel like there's a. I don't like. I mean, I'm all about like treating yourself and doing, you know, self-care and stuff. But I feel like we dive into it as soon as we feel troubled in any way. You know, like, oh, I need a self-care day. And just because you had a really, like, a day where you really had to give of yourself, you know? Like, I catch myself doing that. Like, oh, just like, oh, that day was so hard. I just want to go play video games for a couple hours. For sure. Know? Like, I don't want to have to take care about anything. And so, like, I'll give myself grace in that. But then it's like just so much, it becomes more of a habit of, like, just being selfish, you know? Not giving my time to whether my fiance or something else that's like life-giving in a way. Yeah. I mean, like, you saying I've really struggled with this recently because I don't know what I've read, but I feel like whenever I come across the term self-love in any of the saints, it's always in a negative way. It's always in a negative way. Like self-love is bad. Okay, so I'm trying, obviously they live in a different time, so maybe what they mean by self-love is not what we mean by what'd you just say, self-care. And maybe I don't think they mean the exact same thing, and they don't. Right. But I think maybe the distinction is when we want to self-care, which I think we should take care of ourselves. I'm not saying neglect yourself. Yeah, we should. And we should love ourselves in a healthy way. But I think the distinction lies in when are we truly loving ourselves, meaning we're still in a mysterious way not seeking to fill our egos, but I think honestly it's the paradox of our faith, right? That we're filled by emptying. Yeah, you know what I mean. Right. So I think true self-care, and this is hard. I'm not just saying this to you, Adrienne. I'm saying this to me. Yeah. Like true self-care, I think is still self-emptying. It's not self-filling. I think, and I think maybe true self-care looks more like. And I'm going to knock you here for a second. I'm just as guilty though, but because you said it, not me, that I don't think self-care is video games. Sorry, man. Right. But repent for the kingdom. No, I'm just kidding. Self-care though, it's not video games, but self-care looks more like going out and loving others. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah, absolutely. Or spending time in prayer. And because the truth is I think I myself, when I think, oh, I need a rest, I'm tired, like, especially with my kids, like, I turn to my wife and I'm just like, can I just have like 10 minutes by myself?
And those 10 minutes by myself end up being me scrolling, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
after I'm done, I'm more tired. And I think if I was truly taking care of myself, those 10 minutes wouldn't have been scrolling. They would have been in maybe some prayer or just genuine rest, like sleeping or maybe reading a book or something. So, anyways, I think maybe that's the distinction is that we are naturally, because of our fallen nature, we tend towards a self-love that is more of a vice than a virtue. But I think self-love can be good if it's done in a healthy way or properly. I don't know if you want to defend yourself.
I think there's no.
I'm just kidding.
I'm complete. That was my point of what I was bringing up.
Yeah,
it's just because like I choose the wrong way to fill my cup. You know, like when I am trying to self-love, I'm not doing it. Like my point of what I was saying earlier, but you hit it right on the head. Like I'm not doing it the right way. Like if I really wanted to take care of myself, I need to like crack this baby open and then start journaling, you know, like doing something
specifically
that is
the
more...
Word on Fire Bible.
Oh, I mean, that was the closest one I had.
I'm just kidding.
That's
not a sponsorship.
You want to sponsor us?
If you do click the link below, we'll receive 90% of commissions.
The Word on Fire Bible, make us get us sponsored. But like if I really wanted to do something about it, I would and really take care of myself. It would be something like either calling a friend, catching up with them for 10 minutes, because a conversation for 10 minutes is huge. I mean, I have friends. Because I went to Ave, we came from a bunch of different places, and then after we graduated, went back to a bunch of other different places across the nation, some even across the world. And so, like, if I really wanted to make use of those, like, how many hours I'm playing video games, I would take like at least 30 of those, and talk to one person each 30 minutes, you know?
Yeah.
And how much that could happen. I mean, and even if you said like 10 minutes, those 10 minutes could be fruitful for like a friendship and keeping it intact, right?
For sure.
And making sure that you're actually checking in on them. And because I don't know about you, but I'm an extrovert. And so, like, you know, being quarantined has been like killing me because I haven't been able to see some of my good friends.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been able to talk on the phone.
It's not the same,
but it's not the same.
Yeah.
But I've learned to really love having conversations with people on the phone and on Skype and on Zoom and whatever, because it gives me so much life. And I always come out of a conversation with people like feeling more filled than I was when I entered into it. You know, like I expect to be drained. I expect to be like, oh, I'm just socially exhausted. But no, like it just brings me so much more life. And so like instead of playing video games or whatever, like I should really turn into communication with the Lord or communication with others, you know? And you hit it on the head. You hit it on the head there. That is not self-care, y'all. But enjoy yourself. Enjoy yourself when you have time and you want to, you know, like my excuse for sometimes playing video games is I get to talk to some friends through that. Like Garrick and I will play Call of Duty sometimes, and he's in California, I'm here, and we're just catching up as we play. Yeah. You know?
For sure. Yeah, I'm not on that train that thinks like video games are like intrinsically evil or anything. not at all. Right. But I think that like if anything, right? Like if anything becomes just totally about ourselves, that's when it becomes bad, right? But I agree. Like when I play video games myself, which isn't very often actually at all anymore because I have kids, but when I did play video games or when I do, it almost becomes only for, I think, that communal part, that community, like to do it with someone, to do it with friends. Because like it is hard to, at least right now, to find time to like, and to be able to see other people and to continue to foster friendships. But anyways, I think I wanted to ask you, if someone who's listening is like hearing us talk about virtue and how to try to live this life of virtue, because, you know, it's going to free you. It's going to help you to choose the good and to live a more fulfilling life. Like this all sounds great. So what do you tell someone who like wants to start to do this, but they've never, like they're, you know, they're Catholic maybe even, and, you know, they go to mass, they live their faith as, you know, like a good Catholic, but they want to take it further. They want to become a virtuous man or woman, right? They want to become a saint. And that's going to start by this life of virtue. Like, what advice do you tell someone who's just beginning that journey to try to grow in virtue?
Right. So for for like, this is, I'm looking at it as I'm talking to one of my teens who's doing well, who's like one of my leaders. One of the things I always tell them, you know, is like, go, like, if you're at school, say they're at school right now, or if you're at your coworker or wherever you're at, like, get to know the people around you. And not just be like, not just to be there because they're, you know, like when I go to when I go to the grocery store, or if I go to a restaurant, like, I don't like the conversations to be super transactional, because like, I don't like just like using them, you know, for a service. You know, I know they're there to serve, like when they're working.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you know, how's your day? Like, engaging in a small conversation, like you can call it small talk if you want, but it really isn't if you're really intentional. But like today, my cashier, her name was Nikki, and she was having a rough day. But you know, like she said, like, conversations like this with people who are actually like here to talk, while I'm cashing them out, these bring me life. I think it was actually yesterday when we had that conversation, but still, like, you know, these little things and calling them by name, that for me is what I tell my teens to start doing, because that helps me like see each person as that,
as a person,
a person.
Yeah.
Right. And so you don't have to go call a long lost friend who you haven't talked to for years. You can do that, but it doesn't have to be that. It can start small, you know, or get to know people in your house. Like, when's the last time like you and your family have gotten a heart to heart together? Like, hey mom, what did you feel when you were my age? You know, like when you're going to high school, when you're about to go to college, how did you feel?
Yeah.
Did you maybe your parents didn't go to college? What were you doing when you were 20, 25, 19, 17? Like, what were you doing? And just trying to hear their story, because man, you'll hear some really crazy stories from your parents if you don't know those already.
Yeah.
You know,
you saying this is making it really clear to me that you're a much, even regardless of the video game thing, you're a much more virtuous person than I am, because I saw this meme, I don't know if it was Instagram, Facebook, or whatever, and it said something like, we're all complaining about wearing masks, but it's like, dude, you just got to put on some sunglasses and you now have a full-blown disguise for when you go in public, and you never have to talk to anyone again. And I was like, yes, this was made for me. Like, no, I put my hat on, I put my glasses on, I put my mask on. No one knows it's me. Yeah. Right. So that's my attitude in public.
That's great.
But I like though, what you're saying though, is that like, start with your relationships, right? Start with even like people you don't know. Start with just the natural human interaction that you have, and start being less like just, again, interior focused, and being more concerned about those around you, and making that a habit. I think that's a great like first virtue to try to build upon, is that virtue of just like in relational part of your life, right? Being more aware of others and who other people are, and that other people are persons, and not just like you said, people to basically serve you or be used or whatever you want to say.
Or transactional. Yeah. Transactional. I don't like conversations to be very transactional. It just starts you off in a right path of seeing each person that you encounter truly as that. And I think it's something that I still find challenging. There's weeks where I'm like really good, and then there's weeks where I'm so bad at it, where I'm like, oh, like I don't even know that person's name. Like, I was just like, thank you, bye, like, you know, whatever. And there's a lot of places in my life where I can do better in that. But even then, like, giving yourself grace and understanding that you tried and you're going to do better. You're going to brush off the dirt and go on and try to start the next week, or to start that day, like even more intentional, and like try to get a couple more people. And it's easy to just shelter and to like cover up. And I have the same mentality like you did about like the sunglasses, hats. Like today, like I went to Publix, and there was this the other day I went to the grocery store. I go to the grocery store a lot. I had my mask on, and there's this one cashier that is not one of my students, but apparently used to go to my church before I got there, and always tells me like, I'll be there. And you know, I always try to like invite her to come. And then that day I just wasn't feeling like talkative. So like I was my mask, and I had my I had my baseball cap on because I was actually just coming from the gym. And then I had my AirPods in, right? And so I was just like walking around and like nobody really talks to you. Like the whole purpose, that was not listening to anything on the AirPods. It was just the whole purpose is people don't talk to me.
Right. Yeah.
You know, a whole disguise. And then I walk out and I see, and I was about to go to one that was open. And then the cashier saw me and raised his hand and say hi. And I was like, hey. And I didn't really want to go. It's like, yeah, like her line finishes up and she calls me over. So then we have a conversation, you know, and that was like, you know, I was going to completely avoid her because I saw a free opening.
Yeah.
But I got to get a good conversation with her for like 2 minutes because her line was empty for 2 minutes, you know. But yeah, it's hard. And it's like, you're going to have those days where talking to people or trying to interact, especially if you're not an extrovert like I am, you know, like if you're an introvert, it's going to be even more of a challenge. But like I said, you can start with people that you know and just being intentional with them. And then work your way up there. But if you're an extrovert, do that and then walk your way into the people closer to you. Because that's, sometimes for extroverts, it's harder to talk to people closer to your home than not, you know?
Yeah. I think that sometimes too. I think it's easier to, sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger than the people that you live with about like anything substantial, at least. Right.
Right.
So where do you feel like, prayer plays a role in this? Where does our what part of, you know, are our prayer lives important when it comes to growing in virtue? And if so, like why and how can we make prayer a part of this?
Right. I think prayer is, I mean, obviously always necessary. But I think what I always try to do in my prayer is like I'm just completely I don't know if you're a journaler, but I will journal sometimes. I'll just free pray, like I'll just pray like out loud, and I'll say like, Lord, like I am so dang tired. I am drained from work. I'm not sleeping enough. I'm just not doing it, and I'm not feeling it. And just being honest in that, having those kind of conversations with the Lord, like being just brutally honest with him, like, Lord, I'm not feeling you in today. Like I don't see you anywhere. Like having like those honest, brutal conversations. Like even if you're like in the part of your relationship with God where you're still hesitant to believe that he exists, like just being like, God, I don't even know if you're listening. I don't know if you're real, but look, I'm here. And if you want to make this like, you know, just having that kind of honest conversation in your prayer, I think is what helps me understand. Like it kind of preps me for honest and real conversations with people I love, but then also being intentional with people that I don't know. You know what I mean? So I think practicing a kind of prayer that is not just like rosary beads or recited prayers, like those are beautiful and really like awesome. But if you really want to learn how to be open and honest with people, or to be vulnerable, or to share your heart with others, is to do that first with the man above, you know?
I like that.
If we can't do that with him, if we can't even do it with ourselves, shoot, like how do we expect to do it with other people? You know? So
yeah, because obviously prayer is primarily interior. Of course, we have like the rosary where there's that like exterior sense of prayer, but it's primarily interior. So like you would think that if you can't reflect, like you're saying, on your own brokenness and your own vulnerabilities and to share that with yourself and then with God interiorly, how can you do that like with somebody else? Like how can you open up to another human being as well?
Right.
Yeah. So for sure.
So
Yeah. So
my phone has been going off. I apologize.
Oh no, you're good, dude. I haven't heard it at all.
Realized. Oh, cool.
So I was even gonna say like too. I think that maybe what we could do when it comes to prayer, or at least when it comes to trying to grow in virtue in relationships, is maybe pray for that person that we're trying to talk with, or and that can be prayer in a chapel, right? That can be that prayer time where you separate yourself and pray and be with the Lord. And you might have a list of people, or it doesn't have to be a written list, but just like a list in your heart and your mind of people that you need to pray for, and especially those whom you have conversations with and stuff. But I also think in the moment, right? Like prayer, sometimes we have this picture that prayer is always on our knees in front of the Blessed Sacrament or something, right? Which is a need. You should be doing that in some way if you can. But prayer is also when you're walking around having conversations with people. And I think maybe it's important and necessary to develop, I want to say St. Ignatius of Loyola was a huge proponent of this, whose feast day is today. The presence of God.
Oh.
The presence of God. Is that a St. Ignatius of Loyola thing? I know it's a saint thing in general. But anyways,
yeah, I think so.
Just this spiritual practice of keeping the presence of God wherever you are, wherever you go, where you're always calling upon the name of the Lord, like interiorly, whether that's like literally saying the name of Jesus or just trying to think of the presence of God, that God is within you, that God is around you. When you walk outside and you see nature and seeing that God is here, because God is always present, right? And so when you're talking to someone, maybe, you're in the middle of a conversation, or maybe you're like you walking to the grocery store and you have no desire to speak with someone, or it's me. And maybe if we can develop this presence of God sort of spiritual habit, which it may be a virtue in itself, then we'll be more inclined to, even when we don't want to be like, no, this person here is a child of God. I don't know what's going on in their life. I need to act like they're a human being, and like, even if that's just like giving them eye contact, and that's actually, this is sort of an aside, but that's actually something I'm a huge proponent of when it comes to like homeless people. I share this with my students. Is I work for a Catholic high school that's pretty affluent. Like the students that go there tend to come from pretty good money, and so I mean, not most of the students they're good students and good people, but like, they, are used to being around people who have money. And so when it comes to someone who's poor, like we talk about this a lot, like how should you engage with people who are not as blessed as you? And I try to tell them that, like, you're not always called to have to go out of your way to give money or something substantial to someone in need, unless it's easy. I mean, I should maybe clarify here, like Christ wants you to do that, right? Like, you are obligated to serve people who are in need when you can serve them, but you shouldn't feel guilty if you can't help someone in a moment, in a substantial physical way. But you can help them in other ways. And one of the ways that I'm a huge proponent of is make eye contact with them, right? Make smile. Like, if you're driving and they make eye contact with you, they're like hoping you look at them, because I know, you're uncomfortable. They're trying to get eye contact so that you'll roll down your window and give them money. But like make eye contact and just smile and wave. You don't need to roll your window down, or roll your window down, ask them what's their name. Just find out what their first name is. And say, hey, just know, I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know your situation, but just know that someone's praying for you today. Like, I'm going to pray for you. And so I think that these are things that we could do in combining prayer with trying to live a life of virtue and a life of sanctity. And I truly believe, as we're talking here, if we don't pray, then we're going to fail in the virtuous life, right? We're not going to sustain it, and we're not going to become men or women of virtue if it's not for prayer, because we need God's grace to become men and women of virtue, right? It's not a separate thing. So I want to affirm you and your thing about the homeless people and getting their names. I did a mission trip in Denver, just kind of side note, that with the Christ in the City, where they do homeless ministry, basically. They didn't call them homeless people, they call them the friends on the street. Did you say friends on the street?
Yeah, friends on the street.
I like that. Yeah,
and they kind of like help them. Like, they are intentional. They take routes every day and take a route and like get to know these people and sit down with them and just like offer them some soft foods if they have any, or some socks or water bottles. But really, they create relationships with these people and then try to help them, not financially. They don't give them money, but like help them get their life on track. And so I learned so much in that, and so like. There was times where I'll just carry, like, I mean, I still try to do that now, but in my town, there's not as many homeless people in my, like, where I travel. But back when I was back home, it was, in Palm Beach, they were everywhere. And so like one time I came out with a case of water, and a couple sub sandwiches, like frozen sandwiches where I could give to this guy that was hanging outside of a Target. He's like, dude, I would love that water, but I can't carry it though. There's a couple guys down the street that might need it outside of the plaza. I'll take a couple, and then they can take a couple, whatever, but I really appreciate the subs. I'll take those. And just getting their names and hearing their story just for like 2 minutes. It's huge for them. Then I go in, I went and I saw those two guys, and I was like, hey, do you guys want water? It's like, oh yeah, that'd be great. And so they took like half the case. But they, and they pointed me to another corner where there was more homeless people that they knew that might needed it. And so like there was like this community among the homeless people that care for each other that I feel like we have lost for each other in like in our regular world, and it's just huge. And like this past week, I went in front of a 7-Eleven and there was this homeless guy, and I was afraid, like you said, like I was afraid of because I didn't have money.
Yeah, you feel bad.
I guess I could have offered for. Yeah, I feel bad. So like I just made sure I saw eye contact and waved at him, and he asked me a question. I didn't hear him because I had AirPods in, so I tried to pull one out, and I asked, "Sorry, I didn't hear that." And then I thought he said something else, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And I was like, "So you're gonna tell me?" And I was like, "Oh, sorry, maybe I didn't hear you correctly." So I took both of my AirPods out, and I went up to him. And he just asked for the date, like what day of the week. Oh my gosh!
Wow.
And I was like, "Yeah, it's Wednesday." Like,
wow.
July 20, whatever. And he was like, okay, thanks. I appreciate that. I just haven't understood what day it was in a while.
Wow.
And that was it. That's all he wanted. And I was like, what's your name?
That's heartbreaking, man. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that was it. That was pretty much it. It's just like, these people, just the homeless people out right there, like have so much to teach us, right? Like they don't have much, but they also don't need much. Obviously they would like a house, they would like all these things to not be in the situation they're in, but they understand where they're at. And so they desire only what is necessary for them. And they, they're there to help each other because they care for each other, and they understand that the situation that they're in sucks and they don't want people to suffer too. And so like the community of people, like the guys were just pointing me to other, like those three guys who just pointed me to another person and another person until I was out of water. Like it's huge. Like how much did they care for one another, and that their interest is not just serving themselves, but serving their brothers who they might or may not know. Right. And so I think we have a lot to learn from that.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like the virtuous life, right? They're in their community, in their situation, they're still loving other people. And and not just thinking about themselves, which I feel like we do more often probably than they. So
right.
Well, we can start wrapping up here in just a few minutes. But maybe before we wrap up, as I kind of mentioned to you before, I like to do with each episode is to have a challenge for our listeners to somehow apply what we've been talking about into their own lives. So I don't know, what do you think would be an appropriate challenge in regards to this topic of living ardently and trying to live out the virtuous life? What do you think?
I think one thing that you can do is call, like as we were saying earlier, like catching up with a friend or calling your friend, being intentional in your conversations with the people that you see, not making your conversations transactional, but like looking at the name tags of the like employees that the restaurants or grocery stores you're going to and calling them by name, getting the names of the homeless people, like all of these things that we have mentioned throughout the podcast are huge. And I think those are the things that you can start wherever you're comfortable. Yeah. If you're not comfortable talking with strangers, start with your family. If you're not comfortable starting with your family, go talk to a stranger. But whatever it is, make their interests your interests, right? That's the thing that I wanted to say earlier, is that, what really attracts people to people like virtuous people is because the virtuous people make that person's interest their interest. They're intrigued by their interest. Like, if my friend's a musician and he's creating music, I'm going to listen to his music and be intrigued by his music because that's his passion. And that means a lot to the people, right? And so whatever it is, if your friend's doing something cool, support them, right? And if you're not comfortable with talking or whatever like that, make their passions your passions too. And that's, I think, as simple as a simple challenge that I think is rational, easy, reasonable rather, to be able to do. And I think there's several different ways you can go about it.
Yeah, definitely. So in a practical sense, like if you're listening, think of like someone maybe particular, if you're not comfortable talking to a stranger, maybe think of someone in particular that like maybe you can be a little bit more intentional about just being present with them. Like maybe just one person is a good enough start. Because if we think of ever doing it with everyone, we might kind of get lost in that. Start with one person maybe this week. And if you're comfortable with talking to strangers, I like what you're talking about, Adrienne, and it's something that I might personally make my own challenge in regards to what we talked about today is next time I go to the grocery store or wherever I go, like I often do look at their name tag, but I rarely will say, hey, thank you, Adrienne, or whatever. I'll very rarely do that. And I think that's something, because I'm, again, I'm the person that puts on the glasses and the hat and the mask and like sneak around through Target. But no, that's something that I think maybe you could do too. If you feel more comfortable talking to a stranger, make that your challenge and try this week, every day this week, wherever you go, become more intentional in recognizing the personhood of every single person you come across. So and don't be so transactional.
Just
I like
a little. Yeah, and a little add on to that is if their name tag is hard to read their name, ask them how to pronounce their name.
Ooh, I like
or if you don't hear them the right time, the first time, it's like, okay, can you say that again? I didn't hear. I want to make sure I get it right. Just like having that small intentionality and just even making sure you pronounce their name right is huge. Like I can't tell you how many times people just call me Adrienne and get over with it.
Yeah.
Like I'm Adrienne,
and that's like worse. That's more harm than it was if you just didn't say anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So make sure you just be like that extra step to that is just making sure you hear their names right and say it right.
The worst is if their name is like Joe or John. Yeah. And you ask how to pronounce their name, and it's like
right.
It's like really
don't do that.
But I mean, maybe you didn't know because it was small, printed small.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we wrap up, Adrienne, if any of our listeners wanted to find your podcast or just find you personally on social media or wherever, where can they find you?
You can follow our podcast. We post daily there. We have writers who do reflections on several quotes that inspire people who are maybe suffering through something or just, anybody. So they do some really great reflections. You can follow our Instagram account there, Living Ardently. It'll be, I guess, like just spelled out in the title there of the show. So if you can't spell ardently, it's up there.
It's because I spelled it wrong.
My personal account. Right. No one finds my account because of that. You can follow my personal account at It's Only Adrienne, and Adrienne is spelled ADRIENNE. Again, it's the feminine. It's the feminine way. It's not the normal way. So like, it's not Adrienne. It's Adrienne.
Yeah. I'll be real though. When I saw your name spelled out, I didn't think it was feminine, but I see what you're saying. Maybe most girls have it that way.
It's just like, I guess the history of it, it's the feminine version of the spelling. Right.
Hey,
or the French way.
Oh, gotcha. I'm on that too though. Like my name's Taylor, and so my wife even tells me, "Isn't Taylor a girl's name?" And I'm just like, really? Like you married me, so obviously it doesn't bother you that much.
Right.
So I mean, the reality is, I think I've met more girl Taylors than I have boy Taylors. So I get it too. I'm in the same kind of boat with the name.
Right. Yeah. So it's a great name. Both of our names are great names, and it's we make it our own by making sure people like hear us for who we are. So it's So
yeah, for sure. We're actually we didn't even talk about this before, but so me and my wife, we have 2 kids coming on a third. Actually, we have a third. I don't think I've actually said this on the podcast, congrats. But whatever. We're having a third baby. Third baby coming this December. And so we're totally like right now we're discerning names. So the name thing is kind of interesting. I got to do like an episode on names because just like coming up with names is like a weird phenomenon. Trying to like give another human being their name and not screwing that up is a big task.
Right.
So
my DRE, he got his marriage blessed by Pope Francis, and when he went to go see, he asked Pope Francis to name their children. Their first 2. So the first boy and the first girl.
Did he give them names?
Are named. Yeah. But he didn't tell me. The first name is Maria. So she's named by the Pope, and the second one is a boy. It's a boy name, but they don't have a second yet, and they're not revealing it until.
Okay, it's probably Joseph. It's probably Joseph, right?
Right.
Like Pope Francis was like, "You're gonna put me on the spot, all right? Mary and Joseph. There you go."
But apparently he there's a picture of him of them when they're in meeting Pope Francis and the Holy Father. Like he says the first name and then she looks up and like is thinking of the second name, and then as he looks up to St. Peter's Cathedral, he like comes back down and says the boy's name. It's like, okay, so it's got to be it's got to be one of the saints up there.
Yeah,
right?
That's cool. I'd have to look up to see what saints are up there, but that's a pretty cool thing to be able to say. Yeah, the Pope named my children, but all right, that's like a Catholic brag thing.
Right. So yeah,
for sure,
get those names correct.
For sure.
And if you want to follow my podcast, it's available everywhere you listen to probably this podcast, on Apple, Spotify, everywhere. And we also have a YouTube channel, Living Ardently Podcast. If you look that up on YouTube, you should find it.
For sure. And listeners, if you want to find his stuff, podcasts, Instagram, whatever, I'll try to my best to link everything in the show notes so that way it's easy to access and to take a listen. I just want to say thank you again, man, Adrienne. It's been cool to just chat. Like, honestly, we didn't get to really spend a lot of time chatting when you were over here in California during Garrick's wedding. So it's been cool to just like one-on-one chat and get to know your story more. And it's cool to hear all the things that you're doing with the Living Ardently podcast. I'm going to continue listening to your future episodes and see what more you have in store.
Hopefully you'll be one of my guests soon.
Yeah.
We'll make some time for it when you're not busy. I know you're about to start school and stuff, so
for sure.
We'll have to schedule a time.
For sure.
But I love this. I love this podcast. I love what you're doing. The concept is super unique. I mean, like, it's hard to distinguish yourself from other Catholic podcasts, but because I feel like there's a lot of the same.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But this is this podcast. I mean, even with my own podcast, you know, like I try to make it as unique as I can, but really, you can go listen to like the Blessed Is She podcast and probably get something similar, you know? And so, but this one is definitely like very intentional with breaking open the catechism. So I love it, man.
Thanks,
so keep on going with it. I'll be praying for it. I love it. I love the concept. And thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Really great conversation. And I know I probably talked a lot, so I apologize for that.
Honestly, if the people who've listened to my podcast so far are probably like, wow, I'm so glad Adrienne was brought on because it shut Taylor up. Because I talk way too much too, man. So I did on Instagram, you know, like you do the little question poll things to see what people think, right? You ask a yes or no question. So I asked a question, I put on there, you know, do you like solo or the guest podcast more? And my pride is like, dude, solo all the way. Everyone's going to be saying solo. And it comes back like, I think maybe one person said solo. Everybody else said guest. I was like, Lord, you have spoken. You have spoken. So
yeah. At least you realize it so soon. I realized it a whole season after. Like I did 25 episodes and I was like, all right, maybe I should shut up and then bring people on.
For sure. For sure.
So
all right, man. Well, thanks again.
Thanks again, bro. Appreciate it.
For sure. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the podcast. I very much enjoyed my conversation with Adrienne. He's a real dude. And I loved what he said about being less transactional with people. So that's something that I definitely took away from this podcast and this conversation, that I'm going to start trying to be less transactional, not just with strangers, but even with people that I have close relationships with. So please, if you enjoyed our conversation, hit the thumbs up button below and maybe leave a comment. What are you going to do for your challenge, right? Adrienne challenged us to try to do something extra in our relationships and trying to be more virtuous people and grow in virtue. So what is it you're going to do? What are you going to try and step up and change in your own life so that you can become the man or woman of virtue that God is calling you to be? Anyways, with that being said, I'm looking forward to our next guest coming up in a couple weeks. But until then, God bless you.